Morning, everybody. How are you all doing? Yeah, good. A couple of nods there. Maybe let's get a few more nods. Yeah. Everyone's good. Everyone's good. Yeah, there's some seats at the front here in this second row. It's expensive seats. Yeah, come at the front. There's more seats around here. Yes, please come through. Come through. Plenty of seats here. Yeah, there's some in the back there. There's one here at the front. There's one seat there. Seat here in the second row. Yeah, are we good to go? Oh, 5 more. It's a very... People want to become more security conscious. That's what's happening here. Yeah, come through. There's a seat. There's a couple of seats here. So there's 2 at the back there. And there's 1 in the third row.
Clearly, these are the last doors that are open, I think.
Yeah, we want... There's 1 seat at the back here.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Okay, excellent. Welcome, everybody. My name is Salman, and I am chairing this room. So you are in the session for security cultures and cheap talk. Before we start, and before I start introducing our speaker, so did you or did you not see the Christmas duck in the previous room that you were in? Yeah? No? So underneath someone's seat, there's a Christmas duck. If you can just reach out and see if it's under your seat, you will. You are a lucky winner for a t-shirt. So anybody? No? Well. Oh, there you go. We got it. Oh, yeah. Oh, we have a winner. Round of applause, everybody. So you get a t-shirt. It'll be. You have to give me the duck back. Absolutely, you have to. But it'll be good if you can maybe introduce yourself if you want to do that, and like, what do you do? Just so.
Yeah, sure, thanks. The special guy with the duck. I'm Tom from a company called Tap My Data, and we have weaponized GDPR for consumers.
Weaponized GDPR. I'm going to leave it there. So let me just welcome our speaker, Sebastian Coles. He is an application security engineer for Clarks. He focuses on advising and helping delivery teams build secure applications. We're all in this room. I'm guessing we have a problem with securing applications. That's why we're here. So we're at the right place. Seb thinks that public speaking is beneficial and pushes you outside your comfort zone. Definitely agree with you that. And it also gives you a cheap adrenaline rush. So if you haven't done any speaking before, definitely do it. So we asked him to explain his talk badly earlier on, and he said, obvious security things were said with a rhetoric. So hopefully we will be convinced today. So security, as we know, is now at the forefront, has always been, but there's more visibility of it. Application security is a challenge. Sebastian will talk us about effective practices that he's implemented and he's seen in the past in building security cultures. So please give a round of applause for Sebastian. Take it away.
Okay, so the first thing is, guys at the back, can you hear me? Yep, that's a good start. Before I get in and introduce myself and the rest of this talk, there's kind of 4 things. One, thank you for showing up. Anyone who's spoken to me about getting prepared for these talks, I have 2 fears. 1, my slides don't show. That's 1 fear. 2, no one turns up. So thank you. Thank you for being here. The second one is, I will use a variety of similes, of analogies, of metaphors and anecdotes in this talk. Please feel free to steal them. Okay, steal them, evolve them, because words are so much more important when it comes to application security, and I hope I'm going to convince you why in this talk. And the third thing is this talk, it's not technical. Okay, you're not going to be overwhelmed with technologies and different things. This is a soft talk. And again, I'm really hoping to convince you why words and influence and cultures are so important for application security. So back to me, I'm an application security engineer, also known as an AppSec engineer. What that means is I'm kind of the integration point between cyber teams, IT security teams, those kind of people. I sit in that space, but right on the fringes where they cross over with your software engineering teams, with your DevOps teams, I'm kind of that point in the middle. Okay, I'm kind of the guy that tries to stop an avalanche of governance falling on the software engineering teams. I'm on their side, trying to help them deliver their objectives, but do it securely and empowering them to make security decisions. And I do that through guidance, holding back governance. I let little bits of governance come through, but really so that those teams can then adapt those governance and I can empower them to make the correct risk decisions. And I do that through a variety of means, little bits of governance, lots of coaching. I'll talk a bit more about what my job is day to day in a bit. So let me get started. Oh, the last thing was this talk. I've done a variety of this kind of theme and this kind of talk for a few different conferences now. It ranges between 20 minutes and an hour and a half. I'm hoping to hit around the 35-minute mark today. Okay. So the first thing is when I'm trying to talk about application security, I talk about the challenges that software engineers have with security. And these are represented by these 4 images here, which I'm just going to talk through. And there'll be hands up, software engineers in the room? A lot of you? Excellent. I'm sure some of these you're going to echo with. So the first thing that I talk about is lack of education for security. And I'm not just talking about kind of basic pen testing skills, I'm talking about kind of secure coding, how to use your frameworks properly, the security libraries within your frameworks. Has anyone actually taught you how to use those things? That kind of stuff, a little bit around different governances like ISO 27001 and 34 or BSIM or OpenSAM. A whole bunch of things I just said, a lot of you probably don't know what they are. So it's my job to try and coach people in those kind of things. So there's kind of a lack of education. The next one is around tooling. Not all of you are going to have the right tooling to support you in a secure way. So whether that's static analysis tooling, whether that's dependency injection, the kind of composition analysis tooling, you might just not have the tools available right now to build secure software. Or you might have them, but you haven't been trained in them. It hasn't been rolled out very well. IT security have had a tick box on their cyber program to give you a tool, but they didn't really tell you about it until you got it. So my job is to try and help with that. Next one there is time. We all have just a finite amount of time. We've all got deliveries and milestones that we're trying to hit. Maybe sometimes we just don't have the time to give security what it deserves because there's so many other things to deal with. My background is software engineer. Actually, this is my first application security role. It's my first time into the IT security sphere. For the last five so years, I've been a software engineer. My job is to cut code, build products, and release, support clients. I've been a lead engineer for a while, leading onshore and offshore teams. I am a software engineer. That's my trade. I've moved into cyber. So there's time. And the last thing is about this kind of ever-changing landscape. So my first kind of anecdote that I try to use is I compare learning how to code to the English language. Okay, we've been learning the English language for a very, very long time, all our lives. We've been learning it all through school, through higher education. We've been tested on it, exams on it, all through our lives. Okay, and as a learning model, we're very mature at teaching English. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. We're very mature at that. Yet I still spell stuff wrong. I still write paragraphs with a semantic meaning. I'm not getting across what I mean. Okay, and I've been studying this thing all my life. So when you talk about like languages and C#, which is my forte, JavaScript, the Pythons, or the Go's, which are very infantile languages, and the supporting models to teach people how to build things is very infantile. How do you stand a chance? Especially when we're releasing new patches. I mean, there's no 2.0 English that's about to come out, but the tools and frameworks we use get updated every day. Okay, so that's very hard. one of the anecdotes that I use, please steal it. So things are always changing. So these are kind of the 4 challenges that I try to sell to senior stakeholders to get education, to get time, to get tooling in place. But that's just the start of the story. That's my story to senior management, but there's really a very different story that underpins all of that. Okay, and that's really where my job comes in as an application security engineer. Because we talk about education, and I've just made my case about how hard that is. But some of you have just seen that excellent talk by Emily about having 10% time. I'm sure a lot of you have dedicated time to upskill yourselves as engineers. And I'm sure many of you probably have access to Pluralsight, Skillsoft, Lynda, the LinkedIn thing. You do have the education and stuff available to learn about security. So the question that I secretly am trying to solve is, how do I make people choose to learn about security? Okay, that's a different problem. The same with the tooling. There's lots of free tooling available to assist you in your day-to-day job. Open source, SAST and dependency checking tools, tools to help you learn about basic pen testing, Juice Shot, OWASP, the OWASP Foundation. There's so much tools, free tools available. So is it really an excuse? And the same with time. We all have a finite amount of time, but there's so... Oh. Sorry. It's okay, it's not that interesting anyway. You've got a finite amount of time. So how do I help engineers and teams and people to care enough about security to not sacrifice it, to not bring security to the negotiation table of time? That's another challenge. And there with the ever-changing landscape, well, yes, things are changing all the time, but we still seem to manage to adopt their functionality. We adopt Kubernetes and Docker and Terraform and all this automated provisioning. We seem to rapidly new changing technologies, but we do adopt it and put it into production. So why are we not keeping up with some of the risks involved with that? Okay, so those are kind of some of the softer challenges that I try to tackle as an application security engineer. So through my learnings, and I'm sorry that this is a really dull outcome. This isn't a smart with loads of research outcome. This is just my experiences on the field. Teams that care about application security are the ones that are going to build secure products, regardless of the environmental constraints around them. Okay, so it's my job to make them care, to make all the people around it care. And this is a social challenge, not as much a technical challenge. Okay. So I started to talk a bit about my world as an application security engineer. So I've got this kind of small part that I do most of the day. It's around research, reading news articles, keeping up to date with the tools that the engineers use and any kind of vulnerabilities and stuff that are coming out. That's a small part. And there's a small part around implementation. At the moment, we're trying to bring in various Synopsys tooling into Clark's, Covity SAS analysis tooling and Black Duck and stuff like that. So I have a very active part in that, vendor management, negotiations, bringing the proof of concepts, getting people on board with these tools. Again, kind of a small part of what I do, actually. And then there's the policy side of things. I said before, I'm not a massive fan. Just enough policy for me. I think that's the same for most people. But it's how do I get these teams with secure development policies, with coding standards, but really as light as possible. But again, it's actually still quite a small part of what I do. Moving into the larger sections is actually around facilitation. So a large part of what I do is facilitating security discussions where teams have identified a risk. They might not call it a risk at this point, but they've identified something that doesn't feel right. So there's some kind of possible breach that might happen from this, some kind of sensitive information that's been touched, but there's a problem, but they can't agree how to solve it. That's when people like me get brought in. And we're here to sit around the table, and it's a little bit, it's like a Scrum Master. It's my job to facilitate a secure discussion, but to pump that, not with agile principles, but with secure coding principles or secure architecture principles to try and guide that discussion so the team come to a consensus. So a large part of what I do is around facilitation. The bigger part, and for me, the best part in all of this, the bit that I love doing about this job is I get to teach people. I get to go and join your QA team or your testers. I get to get them in the room, and then we get to load up Juice Shop and try and break into it. I get to talk them through OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, not just testers. I do this with engineers as well. We going through the OWASP top 10. Many of you, I'm sure, have been referred to a Pluralsight video for the OWASP top 10. Very good Troy Hunt video. I say very good. It is very good for people like me who really care about the stuff, but for most people it needs to be a bit more engaging. And that's where my job comes in. I try to take that and I walk people through it. We make environments, we make scenarios, we try and relate it to, in my case, clerks, about incidents that have happened in the past and how these OWASP top 10 things match to that and how we could have avoided it. Okay, so I like that. That's quite cool. It's very much a coaching role. But then the biggest part of what I do, and that's why I keep referring to the social challenge of application security, is that I lobby. There's really no other way to put it. It is my job to influence people and to get them to care about security, whether that's engineers, whether that's teams and BAs and POs and Scrum Masters, or whether it's senior stakeholders and managers. It's my job to try and get them to care, to give time and money into application security. And I'll talk a bit more about how I do that in a bit. So the reason that I'm on stage now and the reason that I come on stage is I'm trying to find people, people like me who have engineering backgrounds, but there's a part of them that actually kind of really cares about application security. They're working in a company, that there are things that aren't happening the way that they want it to do, and they feel a little bit powerless. My job is up here is to try and inspire you to do something about it and follow some of the journeys that I've followed. Like I said, I didn't start in cyber. I started as a software engineer and I became the AXEP SME. All of you are able to do this, follow a similar journey to me. So how do you make people care right at the very start? If any of you have read BSIM, this is a very similar approach. So the first part is around trying to create some kind of evangelist role. And that could be anybody in this room. Just someone who cares and wants to make a difference, wants to make a change to protect our customers, to protect the business, whatever, creating that evangelist role. And then you need some support from senior stakeholders. So my time at the Hydrographic Office, I was very lucky. I had Terry Mackwell, the CTO, wanted to make some security improvement changes. I can be the tool, but he's there banging the drum and opening the doors for me to create that change. You need to find a senior stakeholder. So in Clarks, I'm fortunate enough to have a CISO. Some of you probably have CISOs as well. So getting the evangelist, giving them a senior stakeholder, just to bang the drum, just to open the doors and just to start building your network of people. And from there, my job, and again, this is the process I'm going through with Clarks now, is about establishing myself and my message. I will talk a bit more about the messages, because there's a variety of messages that I use for application security. But if you can, and if you're willing, I encourage people to get on stage, like I'm doing now, to show some vulnerability and to show that I actually give a toss about some of this stuff. And I find any opportunity I can to spread the word about security. So whether that's kind of blogging internally, whether that's intranet news sites, whether that's publishing articles about the good work that is happening in the security space in that company. And from there is the really gentle part where the experiences I've had working as a software engineer against IT security, shouldn't say against, alongside IT security, is trying to ensure that I'm not perceived as a threat. My role, I'm not here to tell you what to do. The reality is your teams, they know the context. They know the business context, they know the product context, they know the risk context, and you know the technologies better than I do in most of the cases. You know what to do. It's my job just to facilitate that discussion and bring in some cyber principles. I can only do that if you trust me. Okay, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to work with you. You are not wrong. What you're doing is not wrong. I am just here so that we can move together better. Okay, so building trust, and I'm sorry to say it, is such a soft challenge. Yes, I have some really good security technical skills. I'm certified AppSec engineer for EC Council, Microsoft certified .NET engineer. I can do the techie talk. But the reality is, day to day, it's such a soft challenge. So once I've built some trust, there it's about making things accessible and starting to promote interest in IT security. So I try to make things available. Number one question that I get is, where do you go to find news about IT security? What kind of blogs do you read? What kind of training do you go on? So I try and be ahead of the game. I make this stuff available to all the people that I meet, regardless of the roles. And if I find news articles that come up or training that might be relevant, it's my job to proactively make sure that gets in front of these different roles. And in some cases, that also means translating or getting the drama out of it. One of my biggest bugbears, my biggest challenges with IT security is there's so much drama involved. One of the slides that I sometimes show is that we always have this perception of the hacker with the hoodie who's hiding behind the keyboard. These people aren't ring wraiths. They're not magic. It's not a magic wand that they use to get into these systems. It's really small coding mistakes that get exploited. So a lot of my job is to try and take the drama out of it. This goes back to this idea of building trust and feeling safe, because usually what happens when someone like me is brought into a software engineering team, there's a lot of defensiveness, because I think people recognize they might not know enough about application security as they think they should. It's my job to say, that's okay, that's why I'm here. I'm here to coach you, so we can all get better together. Sorry. What an amateur. Okay? And that last part there is about growing. I can't do all of this myself. We have a technology team of about 200 to 300 people with various different roles, and it's just me who's an AppSec engineer. It's not my job to manage the risk of all of these projects. The risks of those teams and those deliveries and those products is theirs. It's my job to teach them how to manage that better. And I can do that and gain interest by growing what BSIM would label as satellites or security champion groups or evangelist groups of people that care that I can cultivate. Okay. I also run events, hackathons, that kind of thing, these kind of things, just to get people into security, because for me, I care about breaking the status quo. I think if any of you read the blog post that I wrote for Bristech, for me, where I'm getting the most enjoyment out of my work is where I'm challenging the status quo. And with IT security, you get many opportunities to do that. Okay. As I said, my job is getting people interested in security. And this bottom line is really, really important. Tooling is not going to do that for you. You can throw as much SAST and DAST and dependency checking at your software engineering teams as you like, and that might look great on your cyber program ticking those boxes off. That doesn't mean those tools are going to get used, that they're just going to become a game, that they get turned off, that they get moved around. I'm seeing a few nodding heads here who've experienced this. It's about trying to build the interest first. So, I promise with this talk is 4 techniques that I have found to be the most effective for trying to build cultures that care about security. All of you can pick up all of these, okay? It's not a maturity thing. These are conversations. You don't need to be certified in any of these. Having a little bit of knowledge of the OWASP Top 10 might help, but these are conversations. And I promise you I've had the most impact from these free things you can do than I've had from 6-figure SaaS tools. Okay. The first one that I'm going to talk about is risk lingo, risk language. It really doesn't matter if you are the most elite hacker out there. If you can't convince somebody to do something about that flaw that you found, I'm sorry, it's just useless. Where on the other side of it, if you are just a junior QA engineer and you've managed to find a vulnerability, but you're actually able to articulate the risk of that vulnerability in a way that can get change, that's infinitely better. So my job is to, I guess a similar scenario here is about teaching someone to fish. They can catch as many fish as they want. For me, teaching them risk language, I can help them have productive conversations with senior stakeholders and make change. The next one I'm going to talk about is security requirements. This is super simple. It's super easy elicitation techniques to get people thinking a different way about PBIs and stories, and being able to, the frustration that I see is the first people that give a toss about security is when it comes to the engineering teams. There are so many opportunities before that work even gets to the engineering teams to inject security, and security requirements is one of those ways, one of these ways that we can help software teams build secure products. Onboarding is so simple, such a simple conversation to get new people into your team and give them some relevant security information. You could start this tomorrow, it's so easy. And the last one there is about developer threat modeling, which I'll come into, but this is something that I launched at the Hydrographic Office, and I had nine completely mixed technology teams following this process to make this kind of continuous risk assessment happening through sprints. So I'll talk about that as well. Okay. So as I said, risk language, It's so important. It's so powerful. It's being able to take that conversation from, oh, look, I found this SQL injection, to, oh, look, I found this vulnerability. Oh, look, I found this risk. Okay, it doesn't actually matter how that risk occurred, but it's be able to use the language to say this risk is affecting this asset, this financial asset that we have. It could be a service, it could be data, it could be could be anything, but it's about using the language of asset. And then giving options to stakeholders who own that risk about what they want to do about it, whether we want to try and mitigate it, and we can maybe give you some options, whether we're going to accept it. I take groups of engineers and I go through a training process like this. It doesn't take very long. It's about half an hour just talking through some of these risk languages. And I said I can't promise, especially when we start getting into what I would call the elite risk language about annual loss expectancy. Every engineer that I've managed to get use a phrase like that, they have won that conversation. Okay, I can't describe how powerful it is to communicate risk. Okay, that's the biggest challenge. I'm not going to read all these through, but the slides will be distributed. I think these are the best ones to have. The second one is, some of you might have seen this little clip before. This is taken straight from the CVSS calculator online about trying to quantify risk. And people use this wrong. So what this is a way of, you've got a vulnerability and we try and put it through the scoring mechanism to get a number out of the back of it, somewhere between 0 and 10. 10 is like, let's stop what we're doing, we've got to fix that, that's really bad. The 0 to 10 is a way of prioritizing vulnerabilities, as you can imagine. That 0 to 10 is for cyber people, or for engineers, or for people that care about security. That 0 to 10 doesn't mean a great deal to stakeholders. But the thing that people miss, they punch in this little calculator, and they miss the whole conversation that could be created by this little calculation. CVSS is not about getting 0 to 10. CVSS is about being able to describe the probability of your vulnerability. Because that's what we get asked. Oh, I found this SQL injection. Well, how likely is it? This is your conversation. Well, it's actually quite likely because someone can get from it from a remote network. They don't need physical access. Obviously, the probability would be reduced if they required physical or local access, but they actually can get it from publicly available, from network access. That's part of my conversation. It's still even more probable again because the complexity is low. Okay, a child could do this, is one comment that I've made to a senior stakeholder. Privileges required. Someone can do this through our login page. Okay, that's super bad because they require no privileges to be able to do that, as opposed to a vulnerability where someone's actually had to create an account and get in. Maybe they've had to be given some specific permissions to get to a part of a site to be able to exploit this vulnerability. All of those things mold that conversation that I have around risk. And the last one here about user interaction. Do I need to trick another member, someone unwilling, to initiate the second half of this vulnerability? Maybe I'm trying to steal a session, or if it's phishing or something like that. This is your conversation. It's very powerful. They've written the conversation for you. So please don't just put the calculation in, take the number, and take that away. It's the conversation as well. And again, there I mentioned that a bit in the risk language, is about being able to articulate risk as a way of, there's breaches of confidentiality. There's sensitive information. The confidentiality is at risk. It's not going to be available. We're going to mess it up, the integrity. And the bit that everyone shyly ignores is in the top right there about scope change, which is one of the most powerful parts about this conversation that we're having. It's this vulnerability is not the end of the conversation. It's not the end of that attacker's approach into our system. It's the start. This is how they get in, but they could do more by taking away the integrity of this database through this website. Actually messes up. Oh, really? Messes up the integrity of all these other websites. So the scope has changed. The actual damage, the impact is so much larger. So please, if you're going to use this, don't just get the number, use the conversation. Security requirements, I can't believe it's been 30 minutes already. Shift up. You might have seen this before. We talk about it, we call it shifting left. which sounds like a really bad dance move, but it's this idea of let's not have developers being the first point of talking about security and trying to protect us. We should have enabled them with way more discussion before that, in that PBI or story, somebody doing a risk assessment, somebody doing threat modeling, somebody providing guidance. Okay. Development teams shouldn't be discussing what type of encryption should be used for that thing that they're protecting. Okay, that decision should have happened way over here. You know, they should be provided with that answer, that kind of thing. So just to put you in the headset of security requirements, another round of the facilitation that I do is about having more destructive requirements and about recognizing that this is about being destructive. We have to elicit it. People don't feel destructive day-to-day generally unless you're in cyber. So being able to facilitate separate requirement sessions around security and really being able to ask, what do you not want this thing to do? Okay, so the kind of Jekyll and Hyde there. I have a requirement that I want someone to be able to submit an expense in this application. That's a positive functional requirement. But what I try to get people to do is, okay, so what do you not want someone to be able to do? Okay, so I don't want someone to be able to view someone else's expenses. I don't want them to be able to upload something malicious to that expense. This is really simple. I know it seems kind of daft, but if you were, as an engineer, in your PBI, your story, your ticket, whatever you call it, you had some of these things down the right, you had acceptance criteria actually saying you can't have unauthorized access to this expense. How are you going to get that story to your definition of ready without some kind of test that's proving that your expense is protected? Okay, really simple sentences, but it kicks off this whole range of conversations around the table. Really simple, really powerful. Onboarding, one of my favorite, because I keep comparing this to the six-figure SaaS figures we have to pay for the licenses for these tools. This is so simple. When I have a new engineer that joins my team at the Hydrographic Office, I would sit down for 30 minutes and talk about the OWASP top 10. I would go through injections, cross-site scripting, and I'm not going to say it's shocking because that's the general knowledge is pretty low. I expect that. That's okay. But if I'm saying these things up front, I'm setting expectations. We actually do this in recruitment process now as well. I ensure that there is a security-focused question as part of our recruitment process. I don't expect them to get it right. I really don't. It's about setting the expectation. And when new people join our team, we're going through the OWASP top 10. This is on your first day. I'm setting the expectation. We care about this. Okay. I don't expect you to know what it is, but we might walk away from this conversation with me saying, okay, can you go learn about object relational mappers? Okay, you're not sure what that is, that's fine. Here's some links. This is how we deal with SQL injections. We use these tools. It's really simple. Any of you can do this tomorrow. A basic onboarding checklist, and it's not about quizzing people, it's about setting expectations. We care about security. The amount of conversations that I've had from this, follow-on conversations where someone has come up to me and said, oh yeah, thanks for sending me that link. I've been playing around with G-Shop, or I've been trying to do some, I've signed up to HackerOne and I've started doing some basic pen testing stuff. Based off these conversations is infinitely more powerful than the six-figure SaaS tool, which people ignore. Okay, so I'm gonna start bashing on SaaS now. Okay, the last thing is developer threat modeling. I'm gonna have to talk through this a little bit quickly, but this is a way of trying to have continuous security discussions in Scrum. I model this directly off Scrum because all the teams that I've worked with follow Scrum. It uses languages, the language of Scrum. And basically in the Hydrographic Office, each team had a security champion. They didn't have to be a technical expert, it was just someone that cared about security. They were the security champion and they facilitated this process. And this process is around, for every story that comes up, we have refinement. Okay, thank you. Where we have some should we questions that will say whether this story, does it increase our risk surface? Does it meet our criteria to even have a security conversation about it? And it allows us to very quickly filter out stories that we don't care about in terms of security, but highlights the ones that we do, which then go into more of a kind of threat modeling discussion. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit, but that threat modeling discussion is very much based on stuff like the OWASP top 10. We will talk through, oh, this is some kind of web form input. Let's talk a bit about injections. Let's talk a bit about cross-site scripting. This can be pretty quick. And the key to this is recording the generic scenarios. Most of what you do yesterday and tomorrow will look very similar to a story or a PBI that you've done last month. We don't have to keep having repeat conversations. We just have to make sure that we record them in generic scenarios. So if I have a web form discussion and we've talked about the OWASP Top 10 and how we mitigate these things, to make sure that's recorded as a reference going forward. Okay. I'm having to skip ahead. So the last part, and this is possibly the most important part, is about getting the security message right. And that depends on who you're talking to. Usually, if I'm talking to senior management or stakeholders, I'm talking about the reduction of risk. It's not just that, but it's about exploiting risk, not just reducing it, but reducing it enough within our tolerance in an effective way. By having good application security policy guidance, teams that empower to make security decisions, we can play with risk. We can make sure that we're within our tolerance and just enough, okay? And obviously that's about keeping us safe. So when I talk about risk, the risk of a breach that might lead to a GDPR fine, or I talk about this availability of this service going down and we're not taking payments every second. Quantifiable risk, those are the normal conversations I have with senior stakeholders. The really exciting thing, and depending on some sectors that you're in, I talk about the value proposition of security. So, and if you're in a tech sector, if you're in a kind of a data sector or anything, the most frustrating thing for me about security is that people see it as a cost, like an operational cost. And this is the story that I'll use now is I look at my daughter, she's 2, okay? One day, 15 years, she's going to be 17. She's going to look at me and she's going to say, password 123, what the hell was your generation thinking? And this is that the culture, the application security, the culture that these people are going to care as they grow older, they're going to care a bit more about their data, a bit more about their privacy. How can we not capitalize on that? Our future generations, they're going to care about this stuff. And if you're able to put in all this security process, application security process, this tooling, these metrics about how secure our software is, you're investing in future markets. How can you not take that opportunity? Okay, so that's a really exciting conversation that I can have with business development people, with sales managers. And the really exciting thing is I have these conversations and they're the people that turn up at my sprint reviews. That's very, very cool. So I encourage you to cultivate that message about value proposition, especially if you're working in a data kind of sector where the trust, that people trust you with their data, that you've got a value proposition in security. Next one, this is more about the conversations that I have with engineers now, is about quality systems. We all care about the products that we work on. We want them to be the best products they can be in the constraints that we have. And security is part of that quality. I am sure that there are some very sad engineers around the whole Airbus and the flight systems that have failed and have caused those really sad deaths. I do not want to be an engineer on one of those teams. Okay, I'm sure you don't want to be in a similar situation where your software, the quality wasn't enough. And the last thing there, it's the right thing to do. And that's really why I'm here today. That's why I get involved in cyber. Because at the end of the day, we get quite detached from our customers, but our customers, especially clerks, we get personal identifiable information from people all the time. That is you, that is your children, that is your parents, that is your grandparents, that is everybody that you meet on the street has unknowingly given this information. And the last story that I'll tell is I try to compare it to, say you borrowed the car, your friend's car, okay? That's a pretty hefty responsibility. It's a big physical asset, okay? Now say you put a scratch in that car, okay? You're going to feel pretty bad about that, I would hope. I'm sure most people would feel pretty bad about that, okay? But the reality is that it's a little scratch, tens, maybe hundreds to repair. It's not going to stop them going on the street. Okay, it's not going to stop them going out. It's not going to stop them trusting the people around them. Now let me put you in the shoes of someone who's a victim of identity fraud, where this digital asset that I've taken, this personal identifiable information, has ended up with credit card applications, with money stolen. Think about the emotional damage there. That's going to stop them going out on the streets. That's going to stop them. distrusting the people around them. Who is targeting me? Where is this person? Do they know me? Are they doing it on purpose? Those are the people that I am trying to protect, really. And I'm sure a number of you are too. And this possibly the most important part of the talk is about crafting those messages, because there are a number of messages you can use around IT security and application security, and this is how you affect change. I made it. Okay, thank you. So I'm Seb Coles, application security engineer. I work at Clarks, the shoe company. If you want to get in touch with me, LinkedIn is the best way, or come and grab me. I will be around, or you can find me. That's my website. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Seb. I just learned that password 123 is not probably the most secure password. Thanks for that. No, there's some good tips in there. Definitely quite a few of us took a lot of things away. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, I'm going to start here because...
Security seems like one area where businesses might look to use external consultants and spend money in that way to improve their security. I'm interested in pen testing, for instance, like security on the API side of things. I was wondering if you have done, had to go through a process of assessing external, security businesses, and how, as a business, we might be able to choose a good pen testing external firm or a good security external firm from a bad one.
Okay. So there's a lot we could talk about in that space. The first thing is we all need to remember that we have capabilities inside and that we're supporting those capabilities. So you have QA teams, and making sure that they have a basic level of pen testing is the priority, because you don't want to be spending tens of thousands of pounds to get a list of reflective cross-site scripting that anyone could have found. Okay, so that's the first thing I say. I hope you're investing in your internal resources as well. The second one about choosing pen testing consultancy companies, NCSC, there's a huge amount of a wealth of information that NCSC provide, the National Cybersecurity Centre, as well as verified partners that they trust. So in terms of that, if they're not on the list, I look at that list first. The next one there is around reaching out to your network. So if you are looking for pen testers, and by all means get in touch with myself, or you have network, but let's try and get people who are trusted in the first place. But I will stress, please, 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 all of you, you don't want to be paying thousands of pounds to find the basic OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. You can build that capability internally. Okay. I am trying to put them out of business, I'm sorry. Okay, I hope that answered.
I think there's a question.
Love the talk. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was just wondering about everything you've talked about is large enterprise scale. Like, I think you mentioned about 300 engineers. What about if you're 4, 5, 6 person startup? When do you do this? How do you do this in a much smaller organisation that's hasn't perhaps got the resources for somebody like yourself to do this kind of thing?
For sure. Okay, so that's an interesting question. What I will say is, when you're in those kind of very small stages, your ability to exploit risk is far more important. I know your tolerances are going to be a lot wider, but you're not going to be able to make effective decisions if you can't see that kind of risk landscape, which really is something that you're going to have to start scheduling somehow. So what I do with teams is try to make sure that they have at least half a day, a sprint, 2 weeks, to do something security related. Maybe that's coaching, maybe that's training, but it gets quicker. It's when I talk about developer threat modeling. Now, I came into a team that was spending a day every 2 weeks doing a really quite slow threat modeling process. What I will say is your team is going to hit the same scenarios again and again and again. Take some time, invest some time right now to work out the generic scenarios that you face day to day. Capture that information as a team. How does your team mitigate those vulnerabilities and record them, and use that as a reference going forward? You can massively reduce the amount of time you spend talking about common threats just by referring to the most painful thing is having repeat conversations, and I do see that. We've got this scenario, it's another web form, it's another API we're exposing, but it's the same conversation we had a month ago. Okay, just do whatever you can to capture it and optimize that process. But I would try and take dedicated time. That's the same with security requirements. I don't know if it's the destructive nature about what we do, but it's very difficult to have the positive and destructive conversations at the same time. I would try and just cultivate a little bit, which is just about security, just to get into that aggressive state, I think. I hope that helps. If not, please reach out on LinkedIn and we can have a chat.
Hi. Have you ever had to deal with the flip side where you have maybe a team that's too enthusiastic and paralyzed through paranoia?
That's interesting. I wish I could. No. Well, risk. It's about exploiting that risk. If you have, I'm hoping that maybe you have a number of teams. So we do have teams that are getting into that phase where there are a lot of champions in that team around security. And it does take up a lot of time. One of the more recent techniques I've used is actually to try to disperse that knowledge into other teams and actually say, okay, these guys are all enthused about security. Could you go and have a chat with this other team who's not quite up to speed yet and try and share some of that knowledge over there? So maybe trying to disperse those security-focused people to help other teams is one thing I would say. The other one is you have to treat it a bit like spikes. These things have to be time-boxed. I referenced there about dedicating maybe half a day or hours. It has to be time-boxed. And we have to try to iteratively improve the quality of that time box as we go. The other thing I'd say is, no ability to know what context you're in, but if you have a cyber team, trying to get IT security involved and get their advice from a risk management perspective, what is acceptable. Maybe you might have risk policy people who as well can actually give you some indication of the tolerance of the organization and make sure that your team's focus is in line with the tolerance of your organization. Again, please reach out if I've not managed to answer that as well as you're hoping. Please reach out and we can have another discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
So I was wondering if you have any opinions on whether you'd advocate companies running things like bug bounty programs?
Okay. Again, I'm going to refer back to the question there about outsourcing pen testing. All of your organizations have this potential inside them to catch common vulnerabilities. The one thing I will say, if you've not assessed your estate in the first place before getting a bug bounty scheme involved, you're going to be overwhelmed with really cheap issues that you could have found internally. I personally would recommend getting into a very confident state where you've done that internal testing and you're kind of confident that the product is at a state where you can then, if you go to the bug bounty, I think they're great things. Okay, outsourcing and distributing and getting knowledge from people all over the world to come and attack your system. That is a beautiful thing when you're ready. And that you have processes to actually manage that, because it could be a waterfall. You could be introducing a hell of a lot of stuff, and then you're not going to be able to see the wood from the trees. So until you're mature enough, that internal... Right now, if your organization, if someone on your team finds a vulnerability and you don't have a process to track that vulnerability and resolve that vulnerability, you are nowhere near ready for a bug bounty program. Okay? But if you are in that state, then I'm not saying no, I just say get ready before you... Because that's the torrential. That's when it's all going to come out. Okay.
Okay, let's thank Seb once again for his excellent talk.
I'm happy myself.